Here's an interview from one of our past shows on Rock and Metal Revival. If you're interested in hearing full shows, go to our Facebook page and check out our list of affiliates for times and places where you can hear Rock and Metal Revival.
That was Zombie Apocalypse from Accept on their new album Too Mean to Die. And on the phone, I got none other than one of my favorite guitarists of all time here, Wolf-Hoffman of Accept. How are you doing, Wolf?
Excellent, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Now, Too Mean to Die is your 16th studio album, and now you've got a couple new members to the band and everything too. So
we do.
How was the writing process and everything? Was anything different than the last few albums?
Yeah, a little bit, of course, because my buddy Peter Balt is a longtime bass player. He and I wrote a lot of, or the majority of the stuff these last, actually forever and ever, especially these last 5 albums. So he was no longer there to work with me, which was a drag, and I felt that was sad. But at the same time, I felt like it was more weight on my shoulders. And then we had a new bass player. His name's Martin Motnick, and he came to the rescue with delivering a few really good songs to this album. So I wasn't completely alone.
Yeah.
And we have a new guitar player. Actually, he's a 3rd guitar player in the lineup now. Now we have 3 guitar players. His name's Phil Schaus, and he's an amazing player. So he did a bunch of playing on this album too, which is great. So it was actually more of a group effort and group thing that I was originally anticipating, which was very welcome because I didn't really want to write and play everything alone.
Oh,
it's not all about me. It's a band, you know what I mean?
So by adding a 3rd guitar player, you're live, you guys are going to sound massive, I imagine. Now, how do you split up your guitar harmonies and stuff like that? Is he just going to play the other parts, or?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in our set, that goes back decades, and of course that's not going to change. The stuff I played on the album back in the 80s, I'm still going to play the majority of that myself. But now that he's in the band, we actually made sure that we have, especially on these new songs, that we do have more space for a 3rd guy or for a 2nd lead guitar player if you want. So we made sure there's enough space in these songs where we can do dueling guitar solos back and forth between Phil and I, or we do twin harmonies and still have a rhythm guitar going. So, it opens up the spectrum quite a bit for these live representations of the studio recordings. In the studio, you can layer tracks. We all know that, and there's always multiple tracks. But live now, I think it's going to really make a big difference in how we can represent these songs.
Yeah, I can believe it. Now, since Mark Tornillo, is that how you pronounce it? Tornillo?
Yeah.
Since he joined Accept, you guys have just been putting out stellar material. How did you get hooked up with Mark?
Oh, that's a long story, and so it's going back 12 years by now. It was really by accident that we ran into him at a jam session, and it was an impromptu jam session where Peter and I were just jamming on some classic Accept songs just for a bit of fun, because the band was really not existing at that point. We've been basically in retirement at that point in, 10 years or actually longer. And so Peter and I jammed, and somebody suggested Mark Tornillo as a, sit-in guy for this jam session. And when he came over and joined us, we couldn't believe it. He sounded like he'd always been an Accept, or like he belonged in Accept, because he could really deliver these old songs so convincingly. And at the same time, we found out that he's so versatile. He can do anything. That's why on this new album, for instance, we wrote a great ballad for him. It's called The Best Is Yet to Come. My God, he knocks it out of the park on that one, too. So he can really not just scream and shout and do all the metal stuff. He can actually, sing very melodic and, almost like a human being. Almost,
Nice. So one of my favorite things about Accept music is it's always precise and it always makes sense musically. Now, there's always a lot of classical elements thrown in too. Now, when
Sure.
you were, where did that come from? Were you listening to a lot of classical when you were young, or was that something you were exposed to, or did when you were developing as a musician and a songwriter, did that kind of just pop in? Or
Yeah, I often think about that. I don't really know where that comes from, to be honest. I think maybe in my parents' house. I mean, in the 60s. Well, that would have been early 70s maybe, when I sort of grew up and listening to stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was never rock or metal because, first of all, metal wasn't even invented yet. It would have been
hard rock.
And my parents mostly listened to classical stuff, so maybe I soaked it up with my mother milk that way. But I discovered it in my early 20s. What a fascinating field of music this classical stuff is, and how similar it is in a lot of respects to what we do. So the idea of this crossover thing always fascinated me, going back to the 80s. And, I'd always enjoyed putting a snippet of classical music into our songs, and it was great when you can get away with it.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely. And it opens everybody else's mind up a little bit, too, because, they do, the metal and classical do have a lot of similarities. Now,
yeah, and I mean, I do it for a bit of fun. I'm not trying to educate anybody or be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it that way. I'm honestly enjoy playing these melodies on guitar. It's really fascinating when you can steal something from 200 years ago and stick it in your own songs. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. Now, except guitar solos never seem like they're just off the cuff. They always seem like they're well constructed and thought out. Now, how do you approach your guitar solo? The solos, because you throw harmonies in there and everything else. So seems like
you're right. I look at these guitar solo sections as a chance to do something that gives the song an extra twist or turn. Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends on the song. Sometimes these simpler rock songs that are basically just catchy and a bit of fun, they don't always need a special part, but these more complex riffing kind of songs, I always think like when it comes time to the middle of the song or towards the end, it's always great if there's something happening that hasn't happened before that takes a song in a slightly different direction. So I always treat this solo part almost like its own thing in a way. The main part is always when we write these songs, it's like going, it's the verse, the chorus, what's the whole hook line, and then I worry about everything else later. When I start thinking about my guitar solos, then it's almost like a different song or different part starts in the middle of the song there.
Okay.
And you're right. I often compose them, and I think of these things. Yeah, it's a mini composition almost.
Yeah.
A lot of times sit there and hear the stuff in my head and then play it. I don't always just noodle away and just, let the fingers do the talking. I a lot of times compose this stuff or sing it to myself in my head and then play it.
Okay. Now, I'm a big Flying V fan, and you're one of the guitarists out there who's pretty much always with a Flying V. What got you into the Flying V?
Ooh, that's also many moons ago. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, nobody had Flying Vs.
No.
Or very few people did. They were kind of exotic back then, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. It was really everybody had a Stratocaster or a Les Paul, or maybe an SG, but really not these crazy shapes. Like the Flying V was something quite exotic and unusual, so obviously we needed to have one. And then when we had one, we wanted another one, so that we have two, and it became even more of a trademark over the years. So it was just something that was unusual, and especially when you're doing live shows, it's a showman's guitar, really. I mean, it's a bit flashy and a little bit, it's a statement. It's not just a normal guitar in a way. But of course now they're quite common, but back then that's what got us into those things. And personally, I've always played different guitars in the studio because I like them for live, but not so much for the studio.
Okay.
Because I've been a Strat player. I really preferred Strat, and that's what I mostly played in the studio.
Oh, okay.
But a few years ago, I hooked up with the German guitar company Framus, and they made a special model for me, which is exactly how I wanted it, and it's got a flying V type shape. I mean, it looks like a flying V, and it is a flying V, but really a lot of things on that guitar is more Strat. Stratocaster features, yeah.
Okay,
so
that's kind of cool.
It's a perfect hybrid, and that's what I play nowadays, live and in the studio.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Now, guitar technology's come a long way in the last 40 years, since the 80s. Now, with all the digital modeling amps and all that stuff, and all the stuff you can do on the computers. Now, have you changed the way you record your guitars since back in the 80s? Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could say no. I still play old-fashioned the way we always have, but I've always been super interested in technology and open-minded enough to where, I actually play different stuff nowadays. It just still sounds like tube amps. I'm a huge fan of these Kemper amps.
Oh, okay.
I've been introduced to them almost 8 or 10 years ago now. Crazy. It's been a long time. And they basically take your tube amp, and they don't model it, but they actually record it in a strange way.
Huh.
So you actually feed your own sound into that Kemper machine, and it reproduces it exactly the same way as if you had that amp in front of you. So it's a dream come true.
Oh, nice.
So, and I use it out of convenience because really what you hear is not the Kemper amp, it's really that old Marshall that I have or that old whatever tube amp, but it just lives as a ghost in that Kemper machine now. It's crazy.
Nice. Yeah, because a lot of people I talk, they're like, no, I just plug into my old amp, that's it. So
I know, and out of nostalgia, I could say the same thing, but really being realistic and traveling around the world and such, it's the modern technology, is really something that can be so useful.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Now, Andy Snape has produced all your albums since 2010, so Blood of the Nations and everything. He's also produced a lot of great bands, great albums too, like Judas Priest and Megadeth and stuff. Now, what does Andy bring to the studio that just brings out such great albums out of all the artists?
Money. He brings us lots of cash. I wish. No, it works the other way around, actually. He takes a lot of money. No, man. He's just a perfect guy for the job, I have to say. Ever since we met, he's been he's perfect for us, and that's because he is a metalhead through and through. He really grew up being a metal fan, being an Accept fan. He understands what Accept should sound like. He understands guitar sounds and modern technology. I don't know what I mean. I shouldn't praise him too much. He might get a
want to raise
big ego or something. No, well, actually, that's the other cool thing about him. He doesn't have a big ego. Because I remember working with some producers who did have a big ego, but he's not one of them for sure. So he's all around super nice guy, metal fan. Can't say enough good things about him.
Oh, okay. Well, now, I know it must be weird not being able to, putting out a new album and not being able to go out and tour on it, to support it. But, so, what tracks off of this album would you be looking forward to playing live and getting the fan reactions from?
Actually, it sounds weird, but we could actually do almost all of them. I would look at the first two tracks, opening tracks maybe.
Yeah.
Those might be good show openers for sure. Zombie Apocalypse and Too Mean to Die, the title track.
Mm-hmm.
But heck, The Undertaker might be an awesome live track.
Oh, yeah.
And surely Overnight Sensation is going to be a good live track. I know that. It's a bunch of stuff. And then Symphony of Pain might be cool. I mean, there's so many good songs on this album, I think.